7 of nationals. We have Hawke's Bay on the affirmative. We have Auckland white on the negating. Congratulations. I'm sure you're all very tired and it's been a very busy national, so doing well, guys. The motion for this round is this house prefers religions that teach that reward for devotion for your religion comes during your lifetime rather than in the afterlife. As I'm sure you've all been told many a times, but I have to reiterate, speeches at 8 minutes. I will give you a clap at 1 minute and 7 minutes to open and close POIs. I'll give you 2 claps at 8 minutes. I'll give you 3 claps at 8:15. If you're still going at 8:15, please wrap up your speech so we can help this run to time. Leaders' replies will be 4 minutes. I'll give you a clap at 3 minutes, let you know you got 1 minute to go. 2 claps at 4 minutes. 3 claps at 4:15. At that point, please wrap up your speech. Unless there are any questions or concerns, I think we can get the debate underway. So I will now invite the first speaker from the affirmative bench to open their 2 minutes.
Team Hawke's Bay tells you that dharmic religions uniquely change people's lives and devotions for the better. 3 substantive points from our side today. Firstly, on how your actions change your life for the better. Secondly, on how your feeling about yourself and the world becomes more positive. And thirdly, Bella will provide you a split on broader culture change, right? So firstly, before I get into that, a point of setup and generally on our stance, right? Firstly, what does this reward look like, right? I think this looks like, firstly, the concept of karma, right? What does karma look like? I think it's reward based on your actions, right? I think it's equal and opposite. If you do something good, then you're gonna get something just as good in return, or the same thing, vice versa. I think that what happens as a result of this is you're more devoted to your religion and you get more knowledge and you try to become a better person. And then secondly, on devotion, I think your commitment to your religion becomes more meaningful to you and you likely adhere to it better, right? I think you're better off as a result of your religion, right? I think then secondly on our stance, not quite yet, is that we prefer religions that don't, but not necessarily their doctrines or their scriptures. I think we just prefer the general idea of the values that you necessarily have to do to be devoted. We say that you're taught to be happier now instead of in the afterlife because your actions have rewards to them. I think this looks because it's more effective firstly, but also it's a better and more beneficial way to teach, right? What does this look like? I think this looks like dharmic religions like Hinduism, Buddhism, and Jainism. I'll take the POI.
Many things in your life are uncontrollable, for example, natural disasters, for example, family tragedies. When people hyperfixate on this if they believe in karma?
I don't think so, right? I think the whole point of karma is that you get things opposite and equal, right? So what does this mean? I think that you're likely to then think that, okay, if I do things that are better off in the future, then I'm likely going to get rewards that are better for this, right? I think the general idea and concept that you're likely to get more rewards is even more beneficial, right? But then moving on to my first point, and how action changes your how your actions change. I think for context and generally, religions have specific calls to actions in which they want you to act, right? So 3 reasons why this is more likely to be followed. Firstly, on repension. I think when you have karma, you don't have this idea of a short term, you can make a mistake in the short term and just believe that at the end of the life you'll be able to get to heaven just because you repent, right? I think what this means is that you don't get carbon offset a mistake or an error that you make, right? I think that means likely that you we see this in Christianity where people will do things such as stealing or sexual assault but can get away with it in their head because they think they can confess their sins and repent for it and then still make it into heaven and be great in the afterlife. We tell you that in dharmic religions, you think about these actions individually at the point at which you think about them in more critically and because you don't have the time to repent before consequences arise, you like are more likely to think about it. Note that people are also incentivized to make better decisions on their on their day-to-day actions and think about them more clearly. But then secondly, we tell you that the reward is much sooner and much more materialized and easier to understand. Therefore, humans care more, right? What does this look like? I think the benefit could arrive like in the next week and like much sooner than say like at the end of your life, 80 years later when you've already died, because we think that we can picture what this reward might look like in our heads. We're more likely to be able to like physically like materialize it and like physically care about it more because you can picture it more clearly. I think you can like assume that this looks like charity from your neighbor or like goodwill from someone, and so you don't, but like on the comparative, you don't know what heaven looks like, you don't know what hell might look like and why that might be bad. So it's harder for you to like make decisions that are like consciously like contributing to that. Like, but then thirdly, on the opportunity cost, I think every day where you don't act good is a day where you don't have the chance to be rewarded, right? On the flip side, you can be like particularly devoted and dedicated on one day and help just one person and still be able to get in the afterlife, right? I think on our side, you are able, like every day you want to make good decisions, you want to be rewarded for your actions. What are some of the outcomes of this? I think people who align themselves with their religion and dedicate themselves are able to do this to a greater extent and do it more often, so they're likely to be able to be better people more often to a greater extent. Like this looks like the concept of tikkun olam, I'm sure I butchered that, in Judaism, where you like dedicate yourself more often and you help the most people you can to give yourself and other people greater outcomes in life, right? I think this is a better thing because you do things that are better for people, you do charitable things, you try to be peaceful. The biggest outcomes of this, right, is like the world generally becomes a better place. Why is this? A, because one, you get more charity, but B, because you also fight like less wars over arbitrary things because you want to be peaceful, right? I think people do better actions and that like flows onto society and affects society and like largens the scope of the effect. And I think like I think that if we prove that, we can prove to you that the world gets like a better, more tangible benefit. But then secondly, on how people feel generally better, right? I think people have positive selection bias where they're looking for more good things. When they look for more good things, they start to see these good things happening more often, right? I think this confirms for them, like if you do good things are likely to follow. Then you feel like you can change your situation. Like this response to their point about like devastation, right? I feel like then like you can take good actions and feel like you can change your situation. You hold the power even in a bad situation where you can make your life better, right? I think that this is extremely important, considering like if you're in a bad position and you have no control over it, doing small things can make you feel better, right? For example, people who are like worse off and like are poorer aren't necessarily going to get richer just by like being good, but I think they don't think they're going to become like wealthier. I think they instead do is like have more fulfillment, have more happiness, and have more choice, and like have more joy and the choice and the power to change their own life. This is way more beneficial for them like than aspiring to be like wealthy, which is I don't think something that they even prioritize or think is like realistic, right? I think, but then thirdly, more, if you buy all of the material from the first point, you have to believe that there's increased positive outcomes in which the world will generally become a better place, right? I think like you live a better life when you think that you can do things and be rewarded for your devotion, right? I think for outcomes, I think people stay more devoted to their religion for a longer time in a religion that will give them like more community, shared beliefs and values. You start to notice things like good things and you feel your life is better, so you feel happier. I think when people are generally happier, they tend to like spread their happiness around their communities. I think what happens as a result of this is like, for example, if you like go talk to more people in your communities, you treat your kids, you like, I don't know, you do more charitable things because you feel happier. I think you're likely to become a better person because your self-worth is increased, because your mental health is much better. You're not self-punishing yourself for things that like you don't have any like control over. You're taking your control back. That is the most important thing that you can get out of religion. So proud to stand.
I think that was an excellent speech. I now invite the first speaker from the negating side to come up and open their team's case today.
Aff tells us that rewards and punishments will come directly after your actions, but simultaneously at POI tell us that people will take the time to analyze the events of their life and see if they match the severity of their actions. Note that post-tragedy, people are often emotional and will blame themselves if they believe they have sinned. 3 things in my speech there. Firstly, some notes on setup. Secondly, a point on comfort and security. And lastly, on how we make people act better. On to setup then, I think the first most important question to ask is, what is the purpose of religion? Religion acts as an explanation and an answer of the unknown, and it acts as a comforter for those reasons. For most people, it makes living life easier. Note that for the majority of people, life is often cruel, life is often unpredictable and out of their control. In this sense, religion provides stability, provides comfort and faith. Next then, I think on what does devotion look like? I think we and Aff largely agree on it looks like broadly abiding by the laws of your religion. Very quickly moving on then, on what does being rewarded in your lifetime actually look like? Note this directly responds to what Aff has said about their rewards. We think that it's likely to be a really tangible reward, right? It looks like having a lot of wealth. It looks like being very successful. It looks like being in good health for your life, and it looks like having a good family. Why do we believe that these are the rewards you're likely to face in your lifetime? Note that these are the things that are most proximate and most beneficial to a lot of people's lives. These are the things that are going to feel the most rewarding, the most life-easing for a lot of people. And note that the world is physical. These rewards are also thus likely to be physical. I think as a result of receiving these awards, it fundamentally changes your relationship with God into a transaction of God giving you good things in response to you being a good actor. I think next then, on what rewards in the afterlife look like. Note that there is a diversity of belief here. It looks like heaven and hell. It looks like karmic reincarnation. It looks like escaping the cycle of birth and rebirth. But the general consensus is that you do good and you're provided with security in knowing that after you die, after you cease to exist, you're probably still going to have a good outcome, and vice versa if you are a bad actor. Moving on, before I move on to my first point then, I'll take a POI.
Should you only get a job benefit once you leave a company?
I don't understand how that's relevant to being rewarded for being a good actor in your religion, thus I'm going to move on. On to comfort and security then. What do you need to know here? I've already told you that people are often uncertain about a lot of things, and religion acts as an explanation, it acts as an answer. But particularly surrounding death, a lot of people fear death. They're very uncertain about death. 2 reasons here. I've already told you this. There's no clear answer to what happens after you die. And note that post-death, your afterlife is seemingly eternal, right? This is a very long amount of time for which you don't know what's going to happen to you. That is particularly scary. Secondly then, note that a lot of things happen in your life that are completely out of your control. This looks like natural disasters. This looks like the death of a family member. How do we provide more comfort and security then? 3 main reasons here. I think firstly, a lot of people are generally less responsive to bad things happening in their life. on the comparative, when every single thing that happens to you is seen as a reciprocal from God, as a gift because of how you've acted, it makes people blame themselves. When something bad happens in someone's life, they're probably going to take it as something that's happening to them because they've acted badly. On our side, however, when you believe your reward comes in the afterlife, you're more focused on your own actions. You're more focused on the things you can control, on the things you can predict, rather than hyperfixating on the bad stuff that's happened to you. Secondly, then, on security of knowledge, I think simply in the fact of knowing that there is an afterlife means you're going to be less scared of death. I've already told you why death is scary. It's unknown, it's eternal. Knowing what will happen to you after you die, after you cease to exist, is inherently comforting. It provides security. I think lastly then, on the interrogation of your life as a whole, note that a lot of people go through really rough patches in their life, right? A lot of people have really bad downfalls. A lot of people probably do things that they're not very proud of. A lot of religious people probably go through moments of their life where they're not the most religion abiding person. They probably do things that are considered as sins and are not proud of those things. Note that when your reward is in your afterlife, you feel comfort in knowing that God is looking at your life as a whole. They are not punishing you for one mistake, one misstep, and there's probably a lot of comfort in that. Comparatively then, a lot of people are likely to overthink and hyperfixate on every single mistake they've taken in their life. This is not comforting to know that you've been punished for one lapse in judgment. What do we see as a result of this then? I think the impacts here largely twofold. Firstly, you just have a large amount of emotional stability throughout your life. You don't view every chance event as divine intervention. And I think a lot of people are going to be a lot more forgiving towards themselves when something bad happens to them because they don't feel that it is inherently their fault. Note that this is particularly important because it is a lot harder to seek closure. It is a lot harder to move on from a bad incident when you inherently believe that it is because of your actions, when you believe that had you done something differently, this wouldn't have happened to you. When you have this sort of self-blame, it makes it a lot harder to move on. It makes it a lot harder to become healthier. Secondly then, I think a lot of people just feel better in their final days, right? On AF, if something insanely good doesn't happen to you throughout the process of your life, once you're on your deathbed, once you're 90 years old, you probably feel really bad. You probably feel really regretful. You probably look back on your whole life and think about what you could have done to have had this reward come to you. And you're probably still really scared because you don't know what's going to happen after you close your eyes forever. What this results in people turning into shells of human beings. It looks like a lot of people who are already weak, who are already sickly, living their last days in absolute misery, and it often looks like a lot of people ending their life on bad terms with their religion, on bad terms with God, on bad terms with something that should have provided them comfort and security throughout their life. On our side then, we tell you that a lot of people probably feel secure in their final days. They probably feel good in knowing that they know what's going to happen to them after their life. They're probably not scared, and they probably don't feel regretful about their actions throughout their life as a whole. Moving on then to my next point about how we make people act better. What do you need to know here? Not that people have particularly hard lives. A lot of people are typically time poor. They have work, they have families, they have their own lives to focus on. I think for a lot of people, this is where religion comes in and nudges them in the direction of helping other people, of providing to your community. 3 ways we make this better then. I think firstly, the fact that your reward comes in your spiritual afterlife makes people think the duration of their reward is longer. This is more enticing. This is more appealing. I think secondly, because your reward is in the afterlife, it seems more magical. It seems more supernatural. It seems more intense. Unlike anything physical or real worldly that could happen, I think that is another aspect that makes it more appealing. And then lastly, I think it makes people focus on their life as a whole. When you need to maintain a reward, it means you're likely to keep acting good rather than becoming complacent once you feel like God has rewarded you enough. Note that this directly responds to Af's material about maintaining goodness. I think impacts of this then twofold. Firstly, I think people just in general perform more good deeds. It looks like people volunteering more. It looks like people donating more money when they have the ability. It looks like people just providing more service to their community. And I think secondly, it looks like people providing these services for a longer period of time. It looks like people providing service over their entire life instead of stopping after they feel like they've been rewarded enough. I think this is particularly important because it hits the people who have the ability to do the most good in life. This looks like the billionaires of the world. This looks like the people who are in the most privileged positions. It tells them to be charitable for their entire lives and not to become complacent once good comes to them, once their bank accounts boom, once they become famous. For this reason, side with Neg.
I thank the speaker for what was an excellent speech. I now invite the second speaker from the affirmative bench to come up and continue their case today.
Couple of things to talk about in this debate. Firstly, on the extent to which people fixate on their actions, and when they tell you that you're about how you just care a lot and you think about it forever and you dwell on it. Secondly, on the extent of the mechanism at which enables you to do good things. Lastly, on are you likely to be punished wrongly, and then the fear of death, before I move on to my split point about how we change society at its core for the better. I think firstly on the fixation of the actions. They tell you that you are likely to care more about your individual actions and you are able to move on when you are able to do from a mistake because you get rewarded afterlife. I think that this mechanism simply does not work, right? If I do an individual action and then I get rewarded or punished for it a couple of days later, I have now the completion of that has finished. I have now been rewarded. I have been punished. The action is over. All of the outcomes have occurred as a result of it. On their side of the house, what they have to stand for is that every single action that I take from the age of 0 to the age of 80 accumulates over time, and I am constantly worried in my mind about what some supernatural potential afterlife that they can't even describe to you is going to look like. I think at the point at which they care about the psychological impact on someone and whether or not they're stressing too much about the sum of their actions are adding up over time to an infinite number of actions, and ultimately, of course, you feel really bad on their side of the house. I think what this means is that when they claim that you get more comfort from your religion, you simply just don't, because you have a lot more to think about. Secondly then, on the extent of the mechanism to which you are able to do good things and feel better about yourself. I think firstly in terms of the tangibility of the reward, it's important to understand that it is not just going to be something they give you these examples of it might be a good family or it might be wealth. I think what is clear from that, it is not clear cut, it is not objective. We think that the rewards that you are likely to be getting as a result of your actions could be a range of things as explained from Anshika, but more specifically what they tend to look like in the real world, which is ultimately what we are standing for, religions such as the Dharmic religions, in which it is you just simply get a good action in return for doing a good thing. I think what this means then is that you are likely to care a lot about that, and we gave you a lot of mechanisms about that, specifically because the reward comes very soon. It is likely that you care about each individual action. On their side of the house, they ultimately don't devote to the religion most of the time. Maybe overall at the end of their life, they've done a few more good things than a few more than just bad things. But on our side of the house, we uniquely tell you that you do more good things throughout the majority of your time and to the majority of people. Why? Because each action is weighed individually and you know that you will get punished and rewarded for each action individually. Furthermore, you are unable to make up for those actions over time. On their side of the house, we told you about Catholicism. We told you about how when you confess all your sins, they simply just wipes clean and you have a clean slate, and therefore you can just move on and you go to heaven anyway. At least you are able to make up for in other respects, I did something bad, well now I'll do something good. Eventually by the time I die, I will have done enough good things. This means that on their side of the house, you get maybe 50-50. On our side, you ultimately do more good things throughout your life, which I think is much more beneficial. Clearly then, the mechanism is much stronger and enables you to commit more goodness throughout your entire life rather than just at the end. Next then, on the ability to be punished badly. I think firstly, as I've explained to you, the bad things in your life aren't like, you aren't going to be rewarded in the very specific ways in which they're talking about, and they're likely to be non-subjective things, which means that you might be rewarded in ways like even if you are poor, or even if you are sick, you gain like more community and happiness and fulfillment, or you spend time with your family. I think this means that even if you are suffering or you have bad things going on in your life, that doesn't necessarily mean that you think you are being punished. But furthermore, we tell you that like, what is the outcome of this? If you feel like you have been doing, like you're being punished for something that you have done, either you then try and do better in the future, which I don't see why that's a bad thing, or secondly, you believe that you have now been punished for whatever things you have done previously in your life. You can now move on and focus on doing the best things next. I think that ultimately that is a good outcome, but furthermore, we tell you that these people who are currently suffering benefit more on our side of the house at the point in which you have people like donating to charity day in and day out, caring more and doing more good things and helping to benefit society and move it forward as a whole. So ultimately, I don't think that these people are harmed particularly badly, but I also don't think that they're very impactful in this debate. Moving on then to like the fear of death specifically. They tell you that like death is one thing that death is like the one thing that drives everyone, and we're basically like shells of a human. I generally just don't think that's true, right? Like you look at people like 1 billion or whatever, how many people in India and in like Cambodia who believe in like dharmic religions. They're obviously not shells of people who have no hope in their lives. They are people who still have a purpose and still believe in things. But why is this? I think it's because firstly, death is just inevitable anyway. I think secondly, it's because you cannot predict if it is going to be good or bad on their side of the house. Like they tell you, I have comfort in knowing what comes next, but you aren't able to predict or sum or weigh out all of your things and like get a little calculator out and go, oh no, I'm going to heaven, I don't need to worry about death anymore. There's a very real possibility that you go to hell. But furthermore, we tell you that on their side of the house, it is still an unknown, and you still don't know what it looks like specifically. Like if they are able to get up and describe to me what hell looks like and what specifically my experience is going to be like, I don't think they're able to do that. And also because there's a variety of different religions, right, that have different afterlives. But I think what this means, therefore, is you are never able to fully conceptualize as a person what the afterlife may look like for you, and you are never able to therefore make a conclusion about whether or not I care about it sufficiently in order to be like scared of it and become a shell of a person. Before I move on, I'll take the POI.
Insofar as most religions have clear descriptors of what the afterlife looks like and what you must do to reach different parts of the afterlife, why are people likely to be confused and scared on our side of the house?
I still think the other mechanisms I gave you, it still exists, right? Like, you are still able to, it's still like something supernatural or unknown or not physical. It's not based in like the mechanisms or the physics of the real world. And insofar as it's supernatural, which they already tell you at first, it's probably something that you aren't able to weigh too highly in your life, and you don't really know what to expect as a result of that. I think, therefore, that the fear of death specifically just doesn't really exist or materialize in the real world. And I also think that people just they move on anyway and have to live their lives, and they focus on other things. On our side of the house, I think what you do rather is you focus on the day-to-day life. You focus on making your life the best thing possible. And I also think we care about this more in this debate, right? Like, we don't care about one person who may be a little bit scared of the afterlife. What we care about is their impact and their ability to care about the current real world. On our side of the house, you care more about your actions and how other people are affected in your day-to-day life. And I think that is something that is much more beneficial. But lastly then, on broader cultural and society changes, I think that specifically people who are religious also try to align their religion with the ways in which they act out their lives, and specifically like the ways in which we do things. Like, for example, in our POI when we talked about job bonuses, maybe you are more likely on our side of the house to engage in things like rewarding people throughout the process and saying to them, like, I see the work and the impact that you are doing, and I value that. So you might be more likely to give them a bigger bonus after they do a project. You might be more likely to do like little tests throughout the year for your students and be like, I see that you are doing the work and I'm putting in the effort, rather than on their side of the house. I think your whole world view becomes more about some like ultimate goal. This also ties into material that we give you about like war and peace, and that on their side of the house, you're more likely to go to war because you believe that it may be worth it for some sort of like ultimate goal of maybe I benefit, but ultimately that goal is never certain, and ultimately you could end up harming a large majority of people in the process.
I thank the speaker for an excellent speech. I now invite the second speaker from the Negating bench to come up and continue their case.
Isabella can try to obfuscate, but ultimately the dharmic quote, good things unquote, that they promise you are likely to be the trivial. A new shiny car, a promotion at work. Note that these are the examples that she just gives you. It's this cosmic checkbook balance then that trivializes God, that trivializes the concept of religion. So proud to stand against. 3 things I want to talk about. First, on their argumentation around charity and self-image. I'll note that the argumentation they use is broadly the same for both of these points. Second, I want to work what Mishti's already told you about cosmic security. Finally, I want to comment on their case on social change and deliver a slurch about the prosperity gospel, why this gets so much worse on their side of the house. Cool. On charity and helping your own self-image, I'll note that they try and reach both of these things in roughly the same way in telling you 2 things. First, that they're the side that actually gets you to repent and do things because of it, but then secondly, that it's more proximate to the average person. Why is this not true? First, I just want to touch on this concept of repentance, right? And you heard my POI, I got a bit annoyed. I think in the average religion, faith needs to be justified through works, right? That's a quote literally lifted from the Bible. Why are religious leaders likely to do this? Because that's where their power comes from. It's from their ability to make people do things. I think that both sides can agree. If your religion doesn't actually get your followers to do anything, it's not a very fun religion to be ahead of. The delta then is the amount of incentive that these religions can actually give to the average person. But then let's get on to their stronger push about how this is more proximate to the average person, right? This thing that I can hope happens next week is just more likely to get me to do good things. A few things here. First, they tell you that the concept of heaven and hell is far, far away. I just want to refute that quickly. People are reminded constantly about the afterlife, like every time you step into a church. There's the stained glass of the Holy Spirit coming down and the glory of providence. And I think that the average church leader probably wants you to internalize those things and remember those things because of what I said again about where they get their power from. But then that doesn't engage with what Mishti told you about how the supernatural is likely to be more effective, right? It's much more engaging than a new, Maserati next week, or the dharmic checkbook that I allude to in the introduction, right? Or you can read the New Testament and see Jesus's hair like molten copper. You can see the wonderful poetry of hope and that final amen in the book of Revelation that inspires something grander, something more powerful than like a new car next week could ever actually get you. But then 2 things about why their source of motivation actually is bad, right? People are really bad at telling what's divine or not. Misty told you that after something bad happens to you, you're likely to get emotional. You're likely to blame yourself. So when you do get fired, when something bad does happen in your life, when your world is in flux, you're likely not to actually get any kind of benefit from this. I think over time what's likely to happen is you become overwhelmed with trying to count all, I keep on saying checkbook, but where my karma actually falls. Over time then, I think you become disillusioned with this kind of religion. But then fourthly, extending on that, I think radical agency then means you radically blame yourself. Every misfortune, I think they need to concede, every misfortune that happens in your life is a direct result of what you did in the past, or rather what you failed to do in your past. You gain an unprecedented ability to twist yourself into a knot over what you've done before. I want to touch quickly on this idea of war. It's not very extensively mechanized, but if you believe on their side of the house that this is an incentive that is very strong, that gets you out of bed every morning, I don't see why this doesn't also apply to this concept of war. I think they need to do more work to show us why that's the only way they get it. At the end of all of this then, I don't think people act any better on their side of the house, but it just completely takes out the material around self-actualization. People actively feel lost. People actively blame themselves. Cool. What does Isabella specifically say about the push we get at Mishti around cosmic security? I'm moving on actually here. She tells us that at the end of your life, you're likely to become really stressed out because of the sum of your life being on the judgment table. I'll note that this is already conceding that this only happens at the end of your life. I think the first layer of response here is that on their side, the really proximate thing that you have to do every single week is to take out your calculator, sorry, stealing a line from you, and add up where your karma falls. That's really stressful. I don't think that's something the average person ought to do. But then secondly, like I alluded to at introduction, I think that when you are at the end of your life, you think that God is omniscient and will make this choice correctly for you. On their side of the house, like I alluded at intro, you trivialize God. He's the sky father who hands out trinkets every week because you behave yourself. And honestly, every second week, he gets it wrong and doesn't recognize what I've done. I think on our side of the house then, is you get more comfort from religion. What does Mishti tell you then, and that how they don't fundamentally engage with this mechanism of being funded around security on the eternal, right? How do we solve eternal insecurity? On your deathbed, the most intense moment of your life, the thing that every one of us sadly will have to face, you're terribly, what happens on their side of the house is you're racked with this uncertainty about what's going to happen next on you. I think you should weigh that really, really highly insofar as it happens to every single person on earth. Before I move on, I'll take a point.
Would you then only support a final grade in an exam over, like, also getting grades on your milestones?
I think the slightly tortured analogy here, I'm more than happy to say yes. Cool. On this idea of social change, they tell you, on this idea of social change, I'll deal with this quickly. Basically, the first layer of response here is it's all contingent on the material about how much incentive you have to act out. Insofar as I've already dealt with that, I think you should weigh this inherently less. Second, they don't actually prove why they change anything, right? So the marginal impact of the person who believes in their dharmic religion is really, really small. It looks like poor people actively deluding themselves about their social mobility. They need to prove why they actually stand up to oppressive structures. I'll prove that's why that's actually not true and just a tick. But then it's actively unfulfilling for the people who are least socially mobile. They see bad things happening to themselves. I don't want to beat a dead horse, but they blame themselves for what is happening. Cool. My split on the prosperity gospel then, the claim here is that they pervert religion into something that props up injustice. Two bits of reasoning here. First, the really simple reason, you expect reward in this life, because this life is corporeal. You attach your own goodness to your own level of wealth, so wealth becomes a divine reward bestowed from the heavens or from God or from God's plural. But then secondly, it's something that you really oughtn't question in your life. It carries supernatural weight. That's literally how your religion works. The impact of this then are threefold. First, I think it excuses materialism and places a harmful focus on physical things. Your car, your house, your job, your income, your health. We live in a world where capitalist incentives dominate. People are likely to just take this chance to go with the flow to excuse their own materialism. But then secondly, importantly, as Mishti flagged to you, people feel super entitled in their positions of privilege. They tell themselves, God is rewarding me. They tell themselves, I actually deserve this. That looks like the rich white men of the world in positions of privilege actually justifying them to themselves, I deserve to be here. It stops them from examining history. But then the actual impact here is you're less likely to help if you're one of those people. You actively prop up the social pyramid. Note that when they give you the example of dharmic religions, these are the societies with the largest caste-based issues in the world that creates more injustice. At the end of the day then, I think you should care about this because it means that religious people chase their own tails. It means that the people with the most privilege, the most capacity to change, actively create more injustice, which they can then feel good about solving in the future. For a world where people die happy, vote where need.
I thank the speaker for what was an excellent speech. I would now invite the third speaker from the affirmative bench to come up and continue their case today.
I'm not gonna go to hell, and I'm also not gonna go to heaven. I don't believe in that. I'm Jewish, but I'm also not worried about that at every waking moment of my life. Right? Death is scary. I think it's scary for everyone. I don't think like whether how much you believe in religion matters. But I think the unique harm, like negating have to stand for, is that you at every chance of your life, at every opportunity, you worry about the chance you are going to like suffer in hell forever if you've ever done any bad stuff, which negating tells us, oh, everyone does bad stuff in their life. You have to believe that that they're going to like worry constantly that they have a chance of eternal damnation, the worst like possible fate imaginable. I think that's a massive harm they have to stand for. That's a massive psychological harm for the people. That is how they cannot win this debate. Two things here. Like, one is on how people act, two on how people feel. So firstly, on how people act. I think we have three big ideas here. One, the motivator. Two, the period in which it happens. I guess three. I guess four. Three, the transactionality of it. And four, like who actually does it and what kind of donations happen. So first on the motivator, I think this is probably the biggest part of this, because if you don't get people to actually do the actions, it doesn't matter what actions would happen. So I think the first thing, difference between the teams here is the tangibility of it, right? They tell us, oh, it's gonna be magical, so you really you care about it a lot, because religion is like spiritual, and then like because it's magical, you can't imagine it, so you actually wait even more. I think it is obviously very unintuitive, because when you know something is happening, when you know how something is going to feel, you obviously wait much higher because you are able to imagine it. If you know what reward you can get, if you know you will get a reward, that's a much better offer than just saying, oh, like this is going to happen eventually and it's magical by God, so you have to wait really highly. I think that's very unreasonable. Secondly, on the long-term, short-term elements, they tell us, okay, so it will take a while, but it's gonna be forever. We tell you it's gonna be immediate, it's gonna be very soon, people wait really highly. I think, why are people more likely to think of the short term when making these decisions? I think generally people have a really hard time understanding how long or how big infinity is. They just tell, oh, that's gonna be a punishment, that's gonna be bad. But it's gonna be it's so long from now that I don't even care. I can probably just do the bad stuff now, and then maybe I'll worry about it later. I think what we tell you is that when the harm happens tomorrow, when it happens in the next week, you know it, you can anticipate it, and you can and you feel like it's very certain. Or on the other side, on their side, one is it's not guaranteed to be a harm at all, right? Because if you do a bad thing, but then you also do a good thing, you don't actually have any harm. So as long as you just do enough good, there's no punishment or there's no incentive against doing bad stuff. On their side, you can just do however much bad stuff you want if you donate to charity to right weight. That's a massive harm, right? But I think, just more importantly, what happens is that people are willing, this moves on to the transactionality point. People are willing to sacrifice the short-term, day-to-day problems. They're willing to just say, okay, so I'm gonna be really bad today, but it's fine, because if I'm gonna be really good tomorrow, it doesn't matter, I shouldn't worry about it. What we tell you is that on our side, people think of every action in trying to do the best possible thing they can do. And they note that this directly contends with the material. People sometimes have to do immoral stuff. If you have to do an immoral action, it's not immoral. You had to do it, right? People we're able to get the best possible choice, or people trying to do the best possible choice, doing the choice that they believe is the best at every moment. That is a massive benefit on our side. Now, lastly, on the point that, okay, so on their side, billionaires donate. I I think what you have to believe is that billionaires are only going to donate as much as they believe would outweigh the harms they've caused. It's probably just not so much, right? So a billionaire might donate one time just before they die, like to say, oh, so I can go to heaven now. I don't think that's a particularly good benefit. But then secondly, it's just that like we think there are more important types of donation and or like of charity that we would much rather people do, that everyone can do equally, right? So like engaging with your community, donating, like talking with your friends, like helping a friend that's like in need, like doing some like volunteer work at in a community is a much higher, like is a much bigger benefit we get on our side that everyone can do. So I think even if we don't get any billionaires doing any charity at all on our side, I'm willing to take that harm. I don't think they can claim a lot of benefit there. And why is this crucially important? I think at the end of this, you have to believe that people act more on our side. They act better in terms of like they always try to do the best thing, and they're also like not just going to like be willing to do harm because they're gonna pay it off eventually. I think this means that people act better, and you have like general like massive benefits to everyone in society, right? Because when people act better, people benefit. I think that's quite clear. Before I move on, I'll take your point.
Insofar as stress and mental health issues often make people act badly, how do you justify punishing these people for acting often out of their control?
If it's out of their control, they don't get punished because it's out of their control. It's not a choice they made. It's not like an ethical decision. But now, moving on to the point of how people feel, I think three main contentions between the two teams is like one, well, like how are you likely to feel about your life? Two, on like the certainty and like the possibility of death, and three, on like self-worth and self-blame. I think firstly, we give you Atanshika the idea that because people generally feel like they've been good, they're likely to like notice good stuff that happens in their life more often, right? Because people have a selection bias. So what happens is that once you believe you've done good, so like by like volunteering or helping a person, you're likely to see like good stuff happen to you. I think this just means you reaffirm your belief. This basically creates a positive feedback loop, right? Because at the point where you believe more, it becomes a stronger mechanism. You're likely to do more good, and then you feel like you're a better person, and then you feel even better about yourself. That's a massive benefit that is unique on our side. I think secondly, uncertainty and like death. I think this is like a big push we hear from them, and it's like generally outweighed by the okay, so you have you can either go to hell or heaven, but you can still go to hell. That's not certainty. That's just a different risk. Instead of not knowing what happens or like saying nothing happens, because that's what most other religions believe in. You just say, okay, so you have a risk of like doing something good or doing something really bad. I don't think they can claim any benefit there. We win this debate because we get better actions and better people.
Excellent speech. I now invite the third speaker from the Negating bench to come up and continue their team's case today.
Two things in this speech. Who acts better? Acts better? I think that is the biggest question in this debate. What is the afterlife necessary? But before that, I want to respond to this split. Isabella told us at second that you likely align with your religion, which means job bonuses occur, etc. The first thing I want to note is that Isabella's split tells us what these rewards necessarily look like. It probably looks like money. It probably looks like getting the A or getting everything on that test right. That is something that you need to keep in your notes. But the second thing we'd say, and this is our first response, is to say that yes, per the POI at second opposition, we'd say that yes, you did get an A, but what you didn't do is you didn't fixate over every single little test in between. You weren't anxious every step of the way. You weren't nervous before getting that A. We'd say that we're probably all smart. We've probably all been stressed by a lot of these tests before. We wouldn't want to be stressed by like 10 different tests. We'd rather be stressed by one, and that is extremely important because on their side of the house, people are likely to feel far more anxious for a far more longer amount of time. But so as a result then, her split falls, but her split is actually extremely strategic for us. We wouldn't want people feeling nervous for the entirety of their lives. We just want them, like, even if worst case you don't believe any of our stuff, we would say that having people feel nervous for a little bit is a lot better. Okay, on to who acts better. They've told us that there's likely looks like things like karma, and it likely means that if you do good, you receive, like if you do good, you'll get a good action returned to you. A few things here. Mishti told you that a lot of these things are very uncontrollable. This looks like natural disasters. This looks like family tragedies. Note that we got very little response. These things are often uncontrollable. And we'd say that these things have inherent harm to them because a few things. When you expect, for example, that if your family member died, that you expect to get huge amounts of return, and that return never ever happens, that's extremely mentally draining because they never prove to us why if you go through a natural disaster, why if your family dies, that you are likely going to get that karma back anyways. They never had that proof, and we think that proof false because insofar as many people are vulnerable children who are living in Africa, who every single day suffer, who every single day get misfortune, they never get necessarily bright light, we would weigh and say that they don't feel extremely nervous and hyperfixated over their actions. We would rather them focus on trying to do good, feeling like God is testing them, than saying God is necessarily punishing them, which is the narrative that is spread on their side of the house. The only response came at Isabella at second, who said that you likely take things on a case-by-case basis. It's likely individual actions, so once that action is over, it's completely done with. But the first thing we question is, will those actions actually happen? Because job bonuses, yeah, sure, they might happen, but there are other things that we've told you, like these far more dangerous and far more overwhelming things like natural disasters, etc., that you aren't likely going to get any return from. That's mentally draining because you feel like God is punishing you. You don't feel like God is rewarding you for all the work that you've done. But the second thing I'd also say here is that you're likely going to do more individual karma calculations. They say that at the end of your life, you can't do a lot of this like entire karma calculation. We'd say on their side of the house, you're more likely going to do individual ones. And insofar as individual ones are more stressful, we would never lay that upon a lot of people. But the final thing I'd say here is that repention often holds you accountable. In a lot of these religions, there are a lot of things, for example, like repention, which holds you accountable to the future. Because now you are likely going to feel more guilty in the future, so you are less likely and you are less incentivized to do such things. What that means then here is that on their side of the house, you're likely going to overthink when these things that they say, like when you do good, but good never returns to you. You're likely to overthink, and that's extremely harmful because what you think then is God actually punishing me because I did something wrong, when in reality it was just out of your control? Is it, am I not doing good? Am I not doing good deeds? Am I not doing enough? That's extremely mentally draining, and that is what we say we should buy. What that means then is that you don't get a positive selection bias. You focus on the negatives and you get a negative selection bias. What that means is that on our side of the house then, you uniquely feel good about yourself because you are not mentally drained by every single day having to do those karma calculations, having to feel like you're a failure in life. You have a second chance, you have the ability to repent, and we'd say therefore you are less drained, and we would weigh that highly. Okay, the next thing they told us is that there is an opportunity cost. They say that if you're just devoted for one day at their first, you likely are able to get into the afterlife. Firstly, no, I want to flip this claim. We'd say that on the comparative, when you are able to get successful, it means you likely get complacent with your life. This looks like, for example, billionaires just being complacent with their life. When you're rich at 15, you do not care anymore. You're just complacent for a little bit. And that means that billionaires probably don't give a lot of donations. The only response here was at third, and it was only mitigation. They say that, people are just going to donate enough to recompense for the guilt. A few responses here. Firstly, note that there is still millions and millions of dollars still being donated to a lot of these causes. But secondly, we'd say that they're always going to donate more, because if you buy Isabella's analysis, who said that people can't do this mental calculus at the end of their life, that they're extremely stressful, then they're going to try to donate more to cover up for any potential harms that might create. But finally, we'd say that on their side of the house, it's going to be far worse, because you're going to try cover for every individual action that you committed. We'd say that is far less than a billionaire continually donating a lot and a lot and a lot. What you should believe then is that on our side of the house, A, we just get more money, that's probably extremely good as well, but B, people probably feel better and billionaires are more likely to donate over the future. But additionally then, we'd say, one thing I want to note here is that everybody is probably going to do something wrong at some point in their life. Every one of us in the audience has probably done something wrong. That is because we have inherent addictions to a lot of things. This is an evolution of our biology. It means that you're likely going to be addicted to stuff in your life. And that means that you will do wrong. So even if these disasters don't happen to you, even if these natural earthquakes don't happen to you, you will likely do wrong at some point in your life. And Michigan gave you all the impacts there as to why that's extremely stressful. When you are lying on your bed in those twilight years, you feel extremely harmed, you feel like you never achieved enough, you all weigh that highly. But even if you don't believe that, and this is being charitable and taking them at their best case, we'd say that you are constantly stressed under their side of the house because you're always trying to retain a good image. You're always stressed about what's coming next. And we'd say that when things don't go your way, and this is a crucial line to note, when things do not go your way, you're likely going to be angry. You're likely going to be envious of those people who always seem to have good karma, who always seem to be lucky. And that leads to a lot of things like hostility. That leads to a lot of things like anger. And that means you feel necessarily bad. That means you necessarily are likely to commit angry acts more because you are so scared. Before I move on, I'll take a POI.
How does your material on the calculations and transactionality contend with the harms of Christianity which led to the Protestant Reformation?
Pardon, which led to the what?
The Protestant Reformation.
I think that insofar as on their side of the house, they have to do individual calculations every single day. And if they aren't able to cover for a lot of these things, they're likely going to be more mad. But I also watched this and showed you that you're likely going to be more angry when you aren't fulfilled by that karma, which means you're likely going to do a lot more harmful things. There are 3 deadlock breakers then as to why you get better impacts on our side of the house. The first thing we'd say is that there's a mindset shift. On their side, they're complacent after they fix their karma. On our side of the house, you're eternally trying to chase that extremely happy life. But the second deadlock as to why we get better impacts is time period. On their side of the house, once they're old or once they're rich, they don't do anything anymore. Comparatively, you're always trying to chase a goal. You're always trying to chase that utility adds up and you get more impact. But finally, we'd say we help the most vulnerable people in their life. There are children literally starving and there are children who suffer every single day. They never get that good type of karma. Comparatively, we help them when we show them that God is trying to test you, not that God is actively trying to punish me. Okay, and the final thing I'd want to say here is that they note that they never claimed afterwards what heaven and hell looks like. It probably just looks like some magical experience we think that stands. And we say that in the comparative, you likely fear death. You don't fear death because you think you slowly fade away. We say that's extremely harmful because note that means on your twilight years, when you haven't received anything, you just believe you're going to fade away, you're going to cry. If you care about the vulnerable people, if you care about all those important people and not feeling anxious for the rest of your entire life, you ought side with side opposition.
I thank the speaker for an excellent speech. Now, as is customary, we move to the leaders' reply section of the debate. So we will reverse the speaking order, we will cut speech times in half, and we will close off POIs for the debate. So, without further ado, I invite the leader of side Negating to close their team's case today.
Reply is going to tell you that people fear going to hell on their deathbeds. But that's exactly why they're going to act in the present world. That's exactly why they're going to make their own lives something they can be proud of in the face of an omniscient God when they die. 3 things in the speech then. First, on security and satisfaction, there was very much hay made here. Second, on this idea of charity, that's how they wanted to win today. Thirdly, and finally, I'll extend the margins quickly on this idea of social change. Cool. First on security and satisfaction, I want to note that the kind of security and satisfaction that they get in this debate is very, very short term. A few things here then. First, it's unclear why this kind of repeated action is not fundamentally traumatic. I think in our best case today, we show you that this constant balancing of the checkpoint just ruins people's mental sanity. Second, it's unclear why it's actually distinguishable from just a random event in nature, right? Your house having a tree fall on it, or you being promoted just because your boss was feeling nice. But then thirdly, it's unclear why it's ever achievable for many people in the first place. They tell you material things. I don't think that very many people have the social mobility to ever have access to that kind of opportunity you can get them. But even disregarding that, no matter whichever way you cut it, I think that we're the only side that can offer you this eternal security in the face of death. Weigh this first on the fleeting satisfaction of every time you get that promotion. Compare that then to the last time you are ever awake in your life, the intense feeling of contemplating infinite void or infinite oblivion on their side of the house. What that means then is when your life is literally flashing before your eyes, that's the most intense feeling you should care about in this debate. But then secondly, it's something that every person has to face in this debate. Not every person is going to get a promotion. Let's be real, every person's going to die, weigh that certainty. But then finally, it does have very extensive consequences for the rest of your life. It's those dark moments where you're sitting by yourself, where you don't know where your life is going to lead. It's those dark moments when you're feeling existential and you have nowhere to help. That's where we help. That's where we keep people saner. What that means then is that religion is the only thing that has the authority to answer that question. We're the only side that can actually deliver a change here in any meaningful way. Then let's talk about this idea of charity and acting better. We tell you a few things. First, that supernatural things are really engaging. They're really awesome. I quote from the Bible, I hope that's convincing. But then secondly, there's the infinite stakes surrounding heaven and hell. And then thirdly and finally, there's the idea that you consider things in the long term. You reflect on your life as a whole instead of just trying to do things and do things every single week. I think at our best we can prove why this incentive is greater. But then let's do what Josh does, even if there's complete gridlock. In fact, even if they get more people donating and doing bits of charity, how do we still win? First, I think you need to consider how genuine people are, right? Because we focus more on the omniscience of God, I think you're more likely to be genuine in your own hearts. That means you're more likely to give things and give more. But then secondly, I think what's mostly unengaged with is this idea of forcing more wealthy people to act. Bill Gates, on their side, doesn't need more karma. Let's be real, he's loaded already. The only thing he fears is going to hell. Third F can try to mitigate the extent to which this happens. 0.001% of his income is still millions for millionaires in Africa. But then millions of millionaires in Africa. So then give this point to Neg, even if we get less people acting. Finally, let's talk about this idea of social change. I think at best, on the merit of my split, I hope that's convincing again, I think we can prove that they actually prop up unfair caste systems and systems of injustice. But then secondly, even if we give them their best case today, I think the point on the board is that they never prove why this is actually something the average person can ever achieve in their life. What that means then is you'd simply delude poor people into thinking that they've got it made and never actually doing anything in the long term. For a fairer world, for a more fulfilling life, please vote Hawke.
I thank the speaker for what was an excellent speech. I now invite the leader from the Affirmative bench to come up and wrap today's debate.
I think we've given you a really clear case from first, that basically when you act day to day and every single day, you benefit a wide variety of people, you benefit the most people, and you start afresh every week with a new prospect of a future in which you can continue to do good or you continue to be rewarded. Two things in this speech. Firstly, on the motivation and the actions that you take as a result, and secondly, on self-blame and self-worth. But firstly, I'm just going to go over my split that I think was quite badly misunderstood by the negating team. I was giving you a discussion of how people take the way in which God rewards people and apply that to their everyday life. I think what this specifically results in is not people, I wasn't giving you examples of the ways in which people are rewarded, but the ways in which everyday people now apply those same values to their everyday life. For example, whether it be remuneration at work or something like a quiz at school, rewarding people, giving them a lolly after everything that they do well, and continuing to incentivize them to do better and to do better. I think that is extremely important in this debate at the point in which we value people's self-worth, we value greater change in our society and the way in which we act. Secondly then, on the actions that you are likely to take. I think it is very clear that negating either has to stand for one, every single action matters and contributes to whether or not you end up in a good afterlife. And at that point, if you do just something bad, then you probably end up in hell. But secondly, what I think is probably a more charitable right is that you have to weigh it all up and decide at the end of your life, something like God will decide whether or not you have done good or you have done bad. I think what this means, therefore, is that you can account for the bad things that you have done. You can do truly horrific atrocities. You can go to war and kill millions of people. That was a specific example that we have given to you. But then you make up for it because you donate for the church, as Yuval pointed out in his POI about Protestant Reformation. I think what we stand for on our side is that we don't stand for the weighing and the buying out of different things. We do, however, stand for the individual actions of the day-to-day life, which mean that you care about every single action. They've explicitly told you that they just care about your life overall, but at the point in which that results in 50-50 good or bad, I think we win that point. But secondly then, they talk about the strength of the motivation. They say it's eternal, they say it's really spiritual, and that matters a lot to you. I think firstly, they never explain to you why we value the idea of eternity at the point at which we don't even understand what eternity is. And secondly, the fact that it is spiritual simply harms their case because it is always intangible. It is never something that you have experienced in your real life. It is always magical or something of a higher order that you are never able to understand and conceptualize. And in fact, that you are able to link it to your everyday life. I think on our side of the house, even if you believe or buy the material that the rewards that you are going to be getting is never going to be able to be you won't be able to see that it is a reward, you won't be able to account for it, I think we still win because people devote more and embody the values more and devote more to their religion because they see that they are getting punished. That is the ultimate outcome, and that every day you start afresh and you forget about the punishment because you now move on. You've already done the calculation. It has already happened. You have already been either rewarded or punished. But lastly, on self-blame and self-worth, they give you a couple of things. Firstly, on death, which I think uniquely on their side of the house, those who believe in reward or punishment care more about death. On our side of the house, we've explained to you why you simply don't, because it happens to everyone. And if I haven't existed at some point, I probably don't really care that I won't exist at some point in the future. But also, we tell you that on their side of the house, you have specific harms in that you care a lot more about the weighing and the calculations that you are having to do, and that ultimately on our side of the house, you never do those calculations in the first place, right? Because you are rewarded for your actions every day throughout your entire life. But furthermore, we tell you that you benefit at the point in which you have a selection bias that means that you appreciate the good in life. It means, and even if they tell you about suffering, we tell you that because poverty or illness is proportional to other people, and if you are suffering, poor people can still be happy, they can still receive some benefits, they can still receive fulfillment and have families, and maybe Jeff Bezos just doesn't.
Thank you everyone for what was a fine debate, an excellent round.
Thank you so much, everyone, for what's been a very good tournament so far. I'm going to end the live stream in just a second when it catches up because it has a delay on it. But other than that, I can invite the teams to cross the floor, shake hands, and then everyone can head off. There is no result to come back to because this is a silent round. So great work, everyone.